In this video, we're going to talk about how to face your fears and approach girls. First of all, it's important to understand that this is not easy. Like, obviously, if it was easy, I wouldn't have to make a video about it, but I need to emphasize this point because when it comes to issues of facing fears and facing pressure and facing your own insecurities, in my opinion, when people seek this kind of advice, what they secretly want to hear is like something that will just remove the fear and remove the insecurities. And this is not just with fear, but in general when it comes to advice about girls. Like, I think a large part of the motivation for people to learn about it is the hope that by understanding female psychology and knowing what to say and what to do, then you'll automatically be more confident because of that. For example, back in the old days of the pickup arts, people used to literally memorize scripted lines and stories, basically to avoid having to face exposing their real selves to the scrutiny and judgment and possible rejection from the girls. But none of that really works. Like, at some point, you're going to have to face your fears and insecurities in order to have any success with girls. And in my opinion, confronting these things inside of yourself is actually more important than the external results that you get. But basically, the point is that no matter what I tell you, it's not going to remove the fear. The fear is still going to be inside of you. The only way to truly overcome it is to face it head on. So that's the first important point. But obviously, this is easier said than done. So how to actually do this? Well, first of all, why is it so difficult to approach a girl in the first place? Like, what's really at the root of the fear? To put it simply, the fear of approaching a girl is literally the fear of death. Basically, when you face a girl, you're not just facing her, but what you unconsciously perceive to be her entire social world and her place within society as a whole, including other potential alpha males who might also be interested in her. So basically, on a deep instinctive level, there's a fear that if you approach her, then this potential crowd of people or these other alpha males might retaliate against you and either attack and kill you or exile you from society and leave you to die alone. So the fear that you feel that makes it so difficult to do is a self-protection mechanism to basically prevent you from exposing yourself to this kind of danger. And even in modern times where we can logically understand that if you approach a girl, you're probably not going to die, but there are still things like cancel culture, where you can get your reputation destroyed or lose your job or something like that. So there's still this kind of instinctive fear of basically getting shunned and rejected and outcast from society. And these kinds of things are also extremely unlikely to ever happen, but the fact is that the fear is there. It's very deeply entrenched in our instinctive mind, and there's always going to be this strong psychological force compelling you to just avoid the fear. But if you think of it in this way, as a kind of force that is pushing you to act and behave in a certain way, then this reveals the way to actually overcome the fear. Basically, you need to summon up a counter force from within yourself to overpower this. In practice, this comes from a combination of, first of all, your desire to do it, like your desire to meet and date hot girls, for example. And then on top of that, there needs to be a kind of frustration that builds up inside of you that eventually reaches the breaking point where you just say, screw it, and smash through the fear barrier. So as far as the first thing is concerned, the desire to do it, basically when it comes to approaching girls, you need to be like really serious. Like, if you don't have a really deep desire to do it, then you're probably just not going to do it. Or even if you do, then you're probably not going to continue doing it long enough to actually get good at it. For me, at a certain point in my life, I basically came to the realization that I had to do it. It was like the path that was laid out for me to continue on my own journey of life. And I'm not going to get into all the details right now, but the point is that I had a very strong reason for myself personally where I felt honestly like I didn't even have a choice. It was like my destiny destiny brought me to the point where I had to do it. And also something that sort of brought me over the edge so that I actually did start doing it was that I broke up with my girlfriend, which was my 4th failed relationship in a row. And I basically became completely disillusioned with relationships. And I felt that like if I could just meet girls at will, then that would permanently solve all of my problems with girls, which by the way, it actually did. Like the basic problem that probably most everyone else shares is scarcity. Or in other words, it all stems from being dependent either on one specific person or on outside circumstances and opportunities that are beyond your control. Whereas having the ability to go out and approach girls puts you in control. Like you can just go out and do it whenever you want. And this has deep psychological implications. For example, now, even if I go a period of time without meeting any girls at all, just having the ability to go out and do it completely removes a kind of like deep-seated emotional weakness or dependency, kind of like an emotional void that I used to always feel inside of me, sort of like lingering underneath the surface before I learned how to do this. But now that's completely gone. And this is kind of going beyond the scope of this video, but basically the point is that breaking up with my girlfriend sort of pushed me over the edge so that I really seriously made a plan to go out and start approaching girls. And it's the same for a lot of people. Like when I was learning how to do this, that seemed to be almost like a universal part of everyone's story. Like getting disillusioned and fed up after being heartbroken is almost like a prerequisite to learning how to approach girls. And it doesn't necessarily have to be heartbreak, but there needs to be like some sort of driving force that brings you over the edge to actually decide to really commit to going through the process and doing whatever is necessary to be able to approach girls. So that's the first necessary element to overcome the fear, which is a strong desire and compulsion to do it. The second element is the frustration that builds up inside of you and reaches the breaking point so that you actually do it. And this is very similar to what I was just talking about, like how heartbreak and being disillusioned with relationships can bring you over the edge and give you the drive to do it. But that's on a more macro scale. Like this kind of frustration that I'm referring to here is something that happens once you actually attempt to do it. Because chances are that even if you make the decision that you're going to go out and approach girls, you're probably going to fail to actually do it when you first try. Like the fear is just going to be too much. So it can happen a lot of times where there's a girl and you want to go approach her, but you just wait and wait for the right opportunity, but then eventually the opportunity is just gone, or you just like chicken out and don't do it. And when this happens, it can be very frustrating. It's like you really want to do something, but you just can't bring yourself to do it. And it can feel horrible. You know, it's almost like getting rejected without even actually being rejected, which is almost even worse. But what happens is that once you go through this enough times where you have the real intention of doing it, and maybe you almost do it, but you just can't quite get through the barrier of fear. And then this frustration will build up and build up inside of you until you get to the point where the combination of the desire to do it and the frustration of not being able to do it becomes strong enough of a force to overcome the resisting force of the fear. When I first started approaching girls on the streets, I was so terrified that it took me 3 months of going out every single day, literally for hours, walking around every day with the intention of doing it and failing every single day until I finally just did it. But even now, like after years of experience, this still happens to me a lot, where I'd hesitate for too long or just like chicken out and miss opportunities. And it's exactly the same thing, where I get frustrated when this kind of thing happens, and eventually I reach the point where I just throw myself in. The only difference is that now this process happens a lot more quickly than when I first started. Like maybe it'll take me like an hour instead of 3 months, but it's still the same basic thing. But then after you reach this kind of breaking point where your desire and frustration can overpower the fear, there's still one last obstacle that you have to overcome. Because no matter what happens, there's never going to be a point when you actually feel that you're ready to do it. It's just never going to happen. The barrier of fear is always going to be there. So at some point, you just have to throw yourself into the situation and deal with the consequences once you're in it. You know, it's kind kind of like if you've ever taken a cold shower before, there's never any point when you feel ready to go in. Like at some point, you just have to throw yourself in and then deal with the nervous shock to your system once you're inside. It's exactly the same with approaching girls. And actually, if there's one thing that could help you to do it, it would be taking freezing cold showers to train yourself to overpower this kind of psychological barrier. And then if you're able to actually do this and train yourself to be able to approach girls, it can be one of the most amazing things that you will ever experience. For me, when I look back at the time that I was just talking about, when I finally started to approach girls, it's like this legendary life-changing moment. Like I can almost still feel what it was like at that time. And once you go through this, it's like your brain rewires itself to map out a new reality that lies on the other side of the barrier of fear. I remember the first night after I first started doing this, just laying in bed, and I couldn't fall asleep at all. My mind was just buzzing, and I had like images flashing behind my eyes of like the streets and people and, everything that I had just experienced. It was like I could literally feel my brain rewiring. Basically, an entirely new world was opening up in my mind as a result of going through that. And like I mentioned earlier, approaching girls can also have deep emotional and psychological implications as well. And not just with girls and relationships, but your ability to face fear in general, which has effects on all aspects of life, including at a very deep psychological level. And I could give a lot of examples, maybe in another video, but basically I would highly recommend that you go out and try it for yourself. It can really change your life, and hopefully this video will help you to be able to do that.